Welcome to the Bureau podcast. It is a real honor to welcome Penpa Tsering, the Sikyong, or president of the Central Tibetan Administration. This is the Tibetan government in exile based in India. Mr. Tsering is the highest elected representative of the Tibetan diaspora. And so the voice of Tibetans who, after the Chinese Communist Party's brutal crackdown in 1959, fled into exile with the Dalai Lama. So from outside Tibet, he now carries forward his people's political and cultural will through the diaspora community, which, as the Bureau's viewers know, diasporas worldwide face repression from China outside of China's borders. So we'll touch on that today. Tibet, I believe, is still, of course, a central flashpoint in China's claims of sovereignty against numerous minority groups. So the same issues as Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, yet Tibet itself often receives less attention. So very excited to talk to Mr. Tsering today. I want to start by reading a couple of quotes attributed to you. Let's see if this can help people understand what your job is. So the first quote is, "The more you feed China, the more China will bite." The second was, "The survival of Tibet's identity, culture, and religion depends on the international community understanding that Tibet is not just a human rights issue, it's a geopolitical issue." So welcome, and tell us what you meant by that.
Yeah, Tibet is located. I think people need to understand the basics of what Tibet is, where Tibet is located, and how Tibet is important, not only for the Tibetans, but to the whole world. So Tibet emerged, the Tibetan plateau emerged because of the tectonic shift between the Gondwanas, which is the Indian plate, and the Eurasian plate. Because of the tectonic shift, Tibet emerged as a plateau. So Tibet as a nation is 2.5 million square kilometers, but Tibetan plateau as a whole, extending from Afghanistan to Pakistan to India up to Burma, is bigger than the Tibetan plateau. So the significance of Tibet being located in the center of Asia speaks for its geopolitical importance. And then Tibet being the roof of the world and also being referred as the third pole, having the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost in the world that's drinkable fresh water. It's not available in any part of the world. So that supplies, and that's also the reason why Tibet is also called the water tower of Asia. So environmentally, Tibet is very, very significant. 10 major rivers that originate from Tibet flows into 10 different countries in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia, including China. In fact, Yangtze and Huanghe, the Yellow River, the two major rivers that originate from Tibet and flows into China, are the lifelines of China. If it is not for these two rivers, then China cannot feed its 1.4 billion people. And rivers that originates from Tibet are also cradle to two of the oldest civilization, the Chinese civilization on the Yellow River and the Indus Valley civilization on Indus River that originates from Tibet. So Tibet has its geopolitical significance, geostrategic issues because of its borders with so many other countries, and then also the importance of Tibet's environment. Because the countries that we talk about, from Pakistan to Nepal to India, Bangladesh, there's 5 Southeast Asian countries, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam, and China. These are the 10 countries in which the Tibetan freshwater rivers originate and flow into. And the countries that we are talking about are some of the most densely populated areas in the world. Some of the environmental experts say that out of 8 billion people in this world, 1.8 to 2 billion people have something or other to do with rivers that originate from Tibet. And then we also have a culture that is based on Buddhism, which is also based on ahimsa, nonviolence, and compassion. So if it is a culture that is not worth preserving, then we can do away with the Tibetan culture. But Tibet has a culture that has the potential to spread more peace and non-violence and harmony in this world for people to coexist with each other. That is the reason why Tibet is not just matter of Tibet and the Tibetan people, but it has its relevance all across the world.
So since 1959, the world has been through a Cold War, and it certainly feels like we are in another type of Cold War, perhaps a hot war and a spreading hot war. So geopolitically, what I gather from your first answer, you're indicating that the Tibetan lands, China, Beijing sees as very geostrategically important in its ambitions. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, as we speak, the UN General Assembly is going on, and a lot of leaders are speaking about the values that we so cherish, particularly in the Western free democratic world. But unfortunately, Tibet was occupied by China in 1950. That is after the formation of the United Nations, when China was not part of United Nations. They became a member only in 1972 when Taiwan was already a member of the United Nations. So China used aggression even after the formation of United Nations and the definition of modern nation state and not using aggression against another country's territorial integrity. So all this happened. That is why I keep saying what is happening with Ukraine today, with Russian invasion and what happened to Tibet 75 years ago in 1950 is the same. It's the same international legal order. Uh, there are no two laws, international laws for Tibet and for Ukraine or for any other country that faces aggression from a neighboring country. So even while colonialism was ending in many parts of the world, India gained its independence in 1947. So many other countries around us gained independence. But unfortunately, we fell under the wave of communism that enveloped Russia and China, and then Chinese Communist Party occupied Tibet. That is what the world needs to know. The historical uh, fact of Tibet. That is why China always tried to distort Tibetan history, misinform the world about Tibetan history. So, till the occupation of Tibet by Communist China, Tibet has never ever been directly ruled by any other country, including China.
So let's go back to the first quote that I mentioned. Maybe you can expand on it in light of the whole world as well as Tibet. You said the more you feed China, the more China will bite. And I think when I think of Russia, I would attribute the same quote to Russia's activity. What are your thoughts?
Though some of my friends, leaders, tell us that China is biting at us. Uh, so I tell them China was very weak at one time, and it was United States, it was Western nations, European nations, it was Japan, it was Taiwan who made China strong for what it is today. And knowing that China is biting at you, and if you still keep feeding the dragon, then who is to be blamed? That we need to understand the difference between democracies and authoritarian regimes. You see the flexing of muscles by authoritarian regimes with the Chinese parade of the military parade that China organized with Putin and Kim Jong Un, all the axis of authoritarians coming together. I think that's not a good sign for the world, because if the free world does not want authoritarianism, then there has to be a concerted effort in making sure that authoritarian does not succeed and it does not extend beyond the boundaries where it is already there, and make sure that wherever it is there, we have to lessen those kind of authoritarianism, which does not allow freedom for people, even in the 21st century. It's very sad. And Tibetans inside Tibet are like living dead. They are alive, but they are not free to do anything of their own choice if it goes against the government's thinking.
That's a good opportunity for you to explain what the Central Tibetan Administration is. It's been described as one of the world's most enduring democratic governments in exile. So, how would you, explain to international viewers what the government is, what its governance, and where are its constituents?
As you mentioned earlier, in 1959, even after His Holiness tried to live under the 17-point agreement for 8 years, China trampled on all the provisions of the 17-point agreement. That's also the reason why His Holiness had to flee into exile into India in 1959. And not just even 1 year after coming into exile, His Holiness said we should have representative government, because His Holiness took inspiration from his visit to China in 1954-55, where he saw how communist government functioned. Even though everything looked very disciplined, nobody had the freedom to speak their mind. And then again, His Holiness had the opportunity to come to India in 1956-57, just 10 years of India's independence, very nascent democracy, very chaotic parliament, but everybody had the freedom to speak their mind. That is why His Holiness was influenced by democracy, and he has been a true Democrat. So he introduced democracy as early as 1960. And since then, we have been evolving. In 1960, our people had no idea what democracy meant, what organs do you need, what institutions do you need. Now, after 65 years, with the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his very long-term vision, at those days when we came into exile, our parents thought that we would be able to go back to Tibet in a few years. But now it has been 65 years. And as you said, we are the only democracy in exile with a fully functional democratic polity. We have our Supreme Justice Commission, which functions like an arbitration, but we follow all the processes of law. And but we don't handle criminal cases because we have to conform to the law of the land. So all the criminal cases go to the Indian police and judicial system. But we also have a parliament of 45 members, not representing territories here in exile, but representing the 3 provinces inside Tibet and religious traditions. And 2 representatives from North America, 2 representatives from Europe and Africa, and 1 outside India, Nepal, Bhutan, and the Asia-Australasia region. So these 45 members frame the laws and oversee the works of the executive. And I had the executive with 7 ministries or departments. We have religion and culture with 292 monasteries and nunneries registered with us. We supervise those, but we don't interfere in the running of these monasteries. We also have a department for home to look after the rehabilitation of the Tibetan diaspora community in India and Nepal, mostly. Now Tibetans are spread across more than 27 different countries. The total population of Tibetans is about 130,000 in exile. And out of that, about 80,000 are in India and Nepal, and the rest spread across different parts of the world. We also have a Department of Education. We run 61 educational institutions for Tibetan children. And I think we have been most successful in education, educating our youngsters in the diaspora community compared to many others who don't have these kind of structures. Then we also have a finance department, health department, which has both allopathic and traditional Tibetan medicine. And we also have Department for Information and International Relations, through which we reach out to the whole world. We have our office in Tokyo, in Taipei, in Canberra, in Delhi, Kathmandu, Moscow, South Africa, and Joburg, in London, Geneva, Brussels, and a smaller office in Paris, another office in Sao Paulo for the whole of South America, and 1 office in DC for North America. So even though we have very limited financial and human resources, this is something that His Holiness had the precedence, and we try to follow His Holiness to keep this movement alive. So there are a lot of things that we do with the community to keep our community intact. So my job is not very easy. I have to visit every Tibetan community, as I promised during the last election, 2 times in 5 years. And you have to visit more than 27 different countries. In India alone, you have to visit 35 different locations where Tibetan communities are located. So it is a tough challenge. The main responsibility is to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict as much as we can. But it is dependent on China's position as to how they respond to our overtures. And then, of course, we have to be responsible for the welfare of Tibetans here in exile to keep the community intact wherever we are located. And that is done by the Central Tibetan Administration. So we have to make sure that the administration also runs perfectly to carry out these responsibilities.
Speaking to those responsibilities, as you know, I've written a great deal about China's foreign interference in multiple nations and its repression against many different communities worldwide. You must be an expert on recognizing and countering China's tactics. Can you speak to China's United Front global strategies and networks, and how your government and Tibetan diaspora experiences Beijing's repression?
These are also being termed as transnational repression. Beijing carrying out repression beyond their borders. Now, in the case of Tibet and also with the Uyghurs, I think it's the same thing, because the main weapon that the Chinese government uses is visa, whether it's for the Chinese people or the Tibetans or Uyghurs who want to visit their families inside Tibet or Uyghur or Mongolia or China proper. So that is why they make sure that they keep putting pressure even on Chinese diaspora. When Xi Jinping visits, they have to go and welcome him. If there's some protest, then these people have to participate in the protests against their own wish. So there we have very interesting instances. Like in Austria, there was a Tibetan lady and a Chinese lady who were friends, but they saw themselves on opposite side of the fence at one of the events where there was a protest and also support for the Chinese leader. And later they met, and the Chinese lady said, "I'm very sorry, I have to take part, otherwise I won't get visa to go to China." So that is the kind of pressure that the Chinese government puts not only on others, but also on their own people, on their own citizens, Chinese people. And transnational repression now happens at every level. What we found in the early days was China used New Zealand and Australia as a testing ground to see how Western nations can be influenced. So once they were successful in New Zealand and Australia, then they tried it in other European and North American nations. Now it is not just China's influence on or pressurizing. In the case of Tibet, you have all the families inside Tibet who are asked to divulge the contact of their relatives outside Tibet so that they can control. So they tell the families inside, if you don't tell your relatives outside not to take part in the 10th March uprising or any other protest that the Tibetan non-governmental organizations or CTA is organizing, then the pressure is on the families inside Tibet. But then the pressure on the families outside Tibet is denial of visa. Now you have 15 days of free visa, but we hear many cases of Tibetans. If you have a Tibetan name, and once you arrive in Beijing or Shanghai or Chengdu or any airport in China, you will be detained between 2 to 15 hours. They do a lot of interviews. They search all your belongings. They search your mobile to see whether you have any pictures of His Holiness or, those kind of things. And we also had cases of family visiting Tibet. The husband was detained at the airport and the wife and kids were allowed to go. So many things are happening which are very discriminatory in nature, even if you are a citizen of another country, whether United States or Canada or Europe, anywhere. So these kind of discriminations are normal, and I would definitely suggest people to read Dr. Merike Olberg and Clive Hamilton's book called The Hidden Hand, which describes the United Front Work Department, how it is structured within China and how it uses its influence all around the world. As we speak, we talk about anti-corruption move that Xi Jinping has been taking, over the last more than 10 years, but it still exists, and he has to remove so many of his own appointed leaders. So, but they are promoting corruption everywhere else in the world. with leaders, with prime ministers, with foreign ministers, with ambassadors who have served in China. Now it is not just the political arena that China is using, by influencing the ruling governments. If they are not able to get the ruling governments, they go to the opposition, conduct free tours to China, all paid for with a lot of gifts. And China is known for doing all that. So it's not just the political side, but they use cultural institutions, arts and everything, just like what they did in France with the Musée Guimet and another museum. They asked the museum to change the names from, Tibet to Xizang, because, of course, the name for Tibet is Xizang in Chinese since the Qing dynasty. But today's China's assertion of using Xizang for Tibet is not only a continuation of that, but it has a different political connotation. When China today says Xizang, then it means only Tibet Autonomous Region. It does not include the two other provinces of Tibet. So these are some tactics that China is using in terms of transnational repression. And we are also facing a lot of, in fact, our websites are one of the most attacked websites by the Chinese government. People in internet security study the kind of attacks they do, but we always say that we are transparent. We have nothing to hide, but if they disable our work, that is different. But otherwise, we have nothing to hide from China. We are transparent in all our efforts. Not like how China is using the freedom or the free flow of information in the democratic free world and don't allow their own information to be used. So they have too many instruments to control those, like state secrets law, the security law. So all these laws are meant to curb people from doing or expressing their free will.
In regards of Beijing using the freedom of other cultures and using their own, or not their own, using groups such as students as proxies, I've reported on the case of Tibetan Canadian leader Chemi Lamau and how after she was elected the University of Toronto student president, she got thousands of messages. I believe that was related to Chinese consulate intelligence tasking and interference. I interviewed her. She showed me messages that included what looked like death threats. So are you aware of that case? And could you speak to those types of sharper methods used by Chinese consulates in Canada and worldwide?
Definitely. Chimi is one of our young leaders in the diaspora community. I know her parents. I know her also quite well. She has been quite active in her university days also. So as you mentioned, as you have also studied the case, Chinese government uses Confucius institutions. They uses the students and scholars associations under the direction of the consul general of the embassy under which they fall. So they use all kinds of bodies under their control to intimidate, to make sure that activities of Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongols, now even Manchuria is also coming up. Manchuria, for the first time, a Manchu group came from South Korea to attend a conference in Dharamsala asking for Manchu independence, because Manchu people are not Chinese people. They are different people. So we do watch all these developments. And now, of course, we are inexperienced in a way. People get intimidated by embassies and consulates, but they don't keep evidence. That is what we are trying to teach the Tibetans, to keep evidence of such intimidation, such threats, because the world needs evidence more than anything. So it's not just enough to say I received a threat or I received this or that, but we need to keep those evidence.
Final couple questions. What are your thoughts on Beijing's clear growing aggression in Asia, the South China Sea? Increasingly, intelligence points to potential plans to invade Taiwan. What does that mean for the world, and what does it mean for your government and Tibetans?
Under the prevailing global political scenario, Beijing is trying to portray itself as the good, and several other countries as the evil. So we always, and Beijing just doesn't change like that. It's because of Beijing's belligerent attitude in the whole region that every single country in the region is spending now more on defense. Japan, when I was in Japan, I was speaking to a group of students, and one young boy got up and asked this question: how do I protect my country? So in my mind, I was like, how did this question come to a young boy? Where is the threat coming from for Japan? Obviously, it's China, and of course, Russia also there. So Japan, being a pacifist state after Second World War, now has to spend more money to defend itself for the first time. And South Korea definitely has to spend more time, because it's not just China, but there's also the North Korea angle. For New Zealand, security was never an issue till some time back. But now security has become a major issue for New Zealand as well. And for Australia also, Australia didn't have to spend so much money on defense. Now they have to spend billions to buy 7 nuclear submarines to defend against whom? From China. And you have this constant friction between China and Indonesia on the Spratlys and South China Sea. There's also Malaysia, Indonesia involved, but they are maintaining a more stoic stand right now. Vietnam also has this problem with China on South China Sea, and as per reports now, Vietnam is spending more money on building artificial isles like China is doing in the South China Sea to claim their territory. And then with the Indian government also on the border, border conflict has been one of the persisting problems between India and China, because there was never ever a India-China border. It was always India-Tibet border from Jammu Kashmir to Arunachal Pradesh all the way. On the northern side of India, it was Tibet on the northern side, not China on the northern side. So India still calls it Indo-Tibetan Border Police and Indo-Tibetan Border Force, not Indo-China. That also underlies India's position on the border. And this border friction, if China wants, can be resolved very easily, because India is a very pragmatic country. But China doesn't have the will to resolve this, and China's overall ambition has been to contain India over a very long period of time. So India's foreign policy has always been Jammu Kashmir, Pakistan. Now, of course, India is growing. India's strength is also showing, and India is standing up for its position. And we see a lot of activities on the border, which is not very good, because you're spending a lot on defending your country. And if you can spend that money on education and employment and other things, it'll benefit the people all around, not just for India, but also for Pakistan and China.
Finally, where do you see, what's your objective for your government and Tibetan people realistically in 10 or 20 years, and what can other governments and peoples of the world do to help you get there?
So historically, we lived with the Chinese people for centuries as neighbors, with Indians, with Nepalese, with Bhutanese as our neighbors. And I'm sure you know about a mythological Hindu god called Hanuman, who can lift mountains. But we don't have a Hanuman to lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere in the Pacific or Atlantic near United States or Canada. So whenever we get to go back to Tibet, we will have to live in harmony with our neighbors. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to live as neighbors. So His Holiness always thinks for the common interests of everybody. His Holiness also appreciates the concept of European Union. His Holiness even says that if it had not been for the concept of European Union, Europeans would still be fighting with each other and killing each other. So when His Holiness appreciates the concept of European Union, then why not a union in Asia as well, where we all live in harmony with each other, everybody benefiting from each other with freedom and to live in dignity. That is what we are asking for. We are not asking for separation from China and looking at the reality of situation. And we are seeking a negotiated, peaceful solution with China that is beneficial both for the Chinese people and the Tibetan people and the whole region and for the whole world. That is what everybody should be aspiring for, to preserve the basic human values of respect and dignity of human beings to live freely in this world. And that is what we are aspiring for. We are not aspiring for friction. We are not aspiring for war. We are not aspiring for agony for the Chinese people. No, Chinese people are also normal human beings. They also are looking for happiness. They are also suffering in the hands of Chinese leadership right now, just as we are suffering. But unfortunately, even in this age, these things are happening in this world. That is why, as you asked, what can the world do? If you don't want this kind of situation in your own country, where China is talking about exporting their system of governance to the world, if you don't want this system in the world, then you should support freedom of people who are suffering in any part of the world, whether it's China or North Korea or any other nation that are authoritarian in its nature and does not give freedom to its own people.
That's right. So to underline that, if you don't support freedom in other nations, then freedom will be attacked in your own nation.
I would like to repeat what Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, said once: if you don't support the freedom of the Tibetan people inside Tibet, then you have no right to support any other causes in the world.
Thank you so much for joining me today, and good luck for your time in Ottawa.